The village's brightest star. The village of Kumosa sat nestled between rolling green hills, a place where life moved slowly and the people held onto traditions passed down for generations. It was a land of farmers and traders, where the air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and roasting maize. Among the humble homes and dusty roads, there lived a young girl named Zivah, known far and wide for both her beauty and intelligence. Zivah was the only daughter of Mosi and Adana, a couple who had worked tirelessly to provide her with a good life. They were not wealthy, but their home was filled with love and laughter. Adana, a woman of gentle spirit and wisdom, often told Zivah bedtime stories of powerful women who changed the world. Mosi, her father, would always say, "You will be greater than all of them one day, my daughter." And Zivah believed him. Unlike most girls in the village who were expected to marry young, Zivah had bigger dreams. She was determined to become a doctor, to leave Kumosa and study in the big city where the streets were paved with opportunity. Every day, she worked harder than any other student in her class, earning the admiration of her teachers and the envy of some of her peers. Her parents took great pride in her. At the end of every school term, Zivah would return home with a prize, sometimes for being the best in mathematics, other times for excelling in science. The villagers would cheer her on as she held up her certificates, her bright smile lighting up the village square. "Zivah will make us proud," the elders would say. "She will be the first of us to wear the white coat of a healer." Zivah's heart swelled with hope each time she heard those words. She had no doubt that her dreams were within reach. But fate is not always kind. One warm afternoon, Zivah sat under the great baobab tree near her home, flipping through her worn-out biology textbook. She was deep in thought, imagining herself in a gleaming hospital, when she heard the distant sound of drums. It was the call of the messengers. The village only used the drums for important news, either great celebrations or terrible tragedies. Zivah's heartbeat quickened as she listened. Then, she saw the elders walking toward her house. A darkness settled over her chest before they even spoke. "Zivah, child," one of the elders, Baba Kofi, began. His eyes were heavy with sorrow. Her hands trembled as she stood up. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Baba Kofi placed a wrinkled hand on her shoulder. "Your parents. There was an accident on the road to Zuburi village. Their cart overturned. They did not make it." Zivah's world shattered. The book slipped from her fingers, landing in the dust. Her legs buckled, but strong hands caught her before she fell. The cries of the villagers rang in her ears, but she felt nothing. Nothing but emptiness. That night, as the village mourned, Zivah sat alone in the corner of her home, staring blankly at the flickering flames of an oil lamp. Her parents' voices, once so full of love and encouragement, were now just ghosts in the wind. The funeral was held the next morning. The entire village gathered to honor Mosi and Adana, speaking of their kindness and the bright future they had envisioned for their daughter. But no words could fill the gaping void in Zivah's chest. After the burial, she returned to school, but everything felt meaningless. Where once she had been the brightest in her class, now her books seemed like lifeless pages. The numbers in her mathematics exercises blurred together. Her teachers noticed her decline but said nothing, allowing her the time to grieve. Her classmates, however, were not so kind. "She was once the best in school," they whispered. "Now she is nothing." Zivah heard the words but didn't respond. She withdrew further, eating less, speaking even less. The dream she once held so tightly, of wearing the white coat, of saving lives, began to fade. One evening, as she sat outside her small home, staring at the stars, she whispered, "Mama, Papa, how can I go on without you?" The wind whispered back, but it carried no answers. Days passed, and soon, the National Service Corps arrived in Kumosa. The village buzzed with excitement. These young men from the city had come to teach at the local school as part of their government-mandated service. They brought with them tales of modern life, of towering buildings, electric lights, and bustling streets. Among them was Corporal Idris, a man with a warm smile and kind eyes. Unlike the others, who were eager to enjoy the simple pleasures of village life, Idris took his role seriously. During his first few days, he noticed a girl who never spoke in class. She sat by the window, her books unopened, her eyes dull. Zivah. One afternoon, as the students filed out of the classroom, Idris called out to her. Zivah, stay a moment. She hesitated but obeyed. He sat across from her, resting his elbows on the wooden desk. Your teachers told me you were the best student here, he said, studying her face. But I see no proof of that. Zivah flinched. Idris continued, his tone gentle. Tell me, what happened to the girl who dreamed of something greater? Zivah looked away. She died, she muttered. Idris leaned closer. No, she didn't. She's still in there, buried under the pain. But I believe she can find her way back. For the first time in months, Zivah felt something stir within her. Hope. The next day, she found herself paying attention in class again. For Idris, she tried. And little by little, the light in her eyes returned. But not everyone welcomed this change. The three city men, Kenzo, Deo, and Malik, noticed Zivah too. Unlike Idris, they did not see a girl in need of guidance. They saw something else entirely. And in the shadows of their wicked hearts, they began to plot the arrival of the city men. The village of Kumosa had never been as lively as it was that year. The arrival of the National Service Corps from the city was an event that excited the young and old alike. These were men from the bustling metropolis, educated and well-dressed, bringing with them new ideas, new attitudes, and most importantly, new entertainments for the simple village folk. Among the group of newcomers, Corporal Idris stood out as the most respected. He was calm, disciplined, and genuinely passionate about his role as a teacher. From the moment he arrived, he showed a level of dedication that earned him the admiration of the elders and students alike. But there were three others who were not as noble. Their names were Kenzo, Deo, and Malik, three young men who had grown up in the city with privilege and arrogance. They had no real interest in teaching or mentoring students. Instead, they saw their time in Kumosa as a year-long vacation, a chance to enjoy the simplicity of rural life while indulging in its forbidden pleasures. Kenzo, the self-proclaimed leader of the group, was tall and confident, with a silver tongue that could charm anyone. His words were honey-coated, but his heart was dark. Deo was the quietest of the three, but his silence was not a sign of wisdom. He simply observed, waiting for the right moment to strike. He was a man of hidden intentions. Malik, the youngest, was the most reckless. He lived for pleasure and never thought about consequences. If he wanted something, he took it. It didn't take long for them to notice Zivah. At first, she was just another villager to them, another girl among the many that giggled and blushed whenever they walked by. But something about her was different. Unlike the others, she did not seek their attention. She walked alone. She never smiled at them. She never looked at them. That made her a challenge, and Kenzo loved challenges. One afternoon, as the men sat outside their lodging, laughing and drinking, Kenzo brought her up. That girl. Zivah, he mused, taking a long sip from his cup. She's interesting. Malik scoffed. What's so interesting about her? She's just another village girl. Kenzo smirked. No. She's different. The quiet ones always have secrets. Deo, who had been listening quietly, spoke. She spends a lot of time with Idris. The three men exchanged glances. They had all noticed how protective Idris was of her. Whenever they saw Zivah, Idris wasn't far behind. It was obvious he had taken a special interest in her. Kenzo leaned forward, his grin widening. "So, she's already been claimed." He laughed. "That just makes her more fun." Deo's voice was low. "I heard the villagers talking. They say she used to be the brightest student in school. But after her parents died, she changed." Kenzo's smile faded slightly. For a moment, a flicker of hesitation passed through him. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. "Then let's change her again," he murmured. "Let's remind her what it means to live." Zivah's growing light. While the three men whispered about her in the shadows, Zivah's life was slowly improving. Under Idris's mentorship, she had begun to regain her confidence. She attended class more regularly. She spoke a little more. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream again. Idris had become more than just a teacher to her. He was her protector, the only person who reminded her of her parents' warmth. Whenever she struggled with her lessons, he patiently guided her. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of the girl she used to be. One evening, as they sat under the baobab tree, studying together, Zivah finally voiced a thought that had been lingering in her heart. "Idris, do you think I can still become a doctor?" Idris looked up from the book in his hands and smiled. "I don't think, Zivah. I know." Her heart swelled at his words. For the first time in months, hope felt real again. But hope is fragile. And there were those who wanted to crush it. The whispering shadows. As Idris and Zivah grew closer, the rumors began. The whispers started in the marketplace, spread by jealous girls who had once tried and failed to gain Idris's attention. "Zivah is always with him," they murmured. "What do you think happens behind closed doors? She's not as innocent as she looks. She must be offering him something." Soon, the rumors reached the ears of Kenzo, Deo, and Malik. And they saw their opportunity. One evening, as Zivah walked home from her lessons, Kenzo appeared in her path. "Zivah," he greeted smoothly, flashing a charming smile. She stopped but did not return his smile. "Good evening." Kenzo placed a hand over his chest, feigning hurt. "Only good evening. No warm words for your new teachers?" "I am in a hurry," she said, her voice even. Kenzo stepped closer, blocking her path. "In a hurry? That's funny. Because Idris doesn't seem to be in a hurry when you visit him." Zivah's breath hitched. She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Kenzo chuckled. "Oh, come on, Zivah. The whole village knows. You spend so much time at his house. Surely, you're not just studying." Her hands clenched into fists. "You don't know what you're talking about." Malik appeared beside her, smirking. "We're just saying, why give yourself to one man when there are three more willing?" Zivah's blood ran cold. Before she could react, Deo leaned in and whispered, "You'll come to us willingly. Or we'll make sure you do." A chill ran down her spine. She turned and ran, their laughter following her all the way home. That night, Zivah barely slept. She had seen hunger in their eyes. And she knew she was being haunted. The trap is set. The following day, Kenzo, Deo, and Malik put their plan into action. They spread more poisonous rumors, ensuring that the village women believed Zivah was seducing Idris. "Did you hear?" they whispered. "She stays at his house late into the night. Who knows what she offers him in exchange for good grades?" The gossip spread like wildfire. And as expected, Idris heard it too. One afternoon, as he walked Zivah home, he stopped and sighed heavily. "Zivah, people are talking." She froze. "What are they saying?" His jaw tightened. That you and I, that we are involved. Zivah's stomach twisted. It's a lie, she blurted. I know, Idris said softly. But people love to believe lies more than the truth. Zivah felt her knees weaken. What should we do? Idris hesitated. Then he said, for now, we should be careful. But careful wasn't enough. The wolves were already closing in. One evening, as Idris was called away on urgent business, Zivah found herself alone. And waiting for her were the three men. Kenzo smiled as she passed their quarters. You look tired, Zivah, he said. Come inside and rest for a while. She hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, the trap was sprung. A betrayal in the dark. Zivah hesitated at the threshold of the core members' quarters. Something in Kenzo's voice sent a shiver down her spine, but she ignored it. She was tired, her body worn from studying all day. Idris wasn't in the village, he had left for an emergency, and without him, she felt more alone than ever. Come, just for a while, Kenzo coaxed, his voice smooth like honey. We won't bite. Deo and Malik stood behind him, their faces masked with friendly smiles, but their eyes told a different story. Zivah knew better. Every part of her screamed at her to walk away. But then she thought of the rumors spreading like wildfire in the village. No matter what she did, people would always whisper. Wouldn't it be better to confront them? To prove them wrong? Taking a shaky breath, she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with wooden furniture pushed against the walls. A single candle flickered on the table, casting eerie shadows across the room. The air smelled of sweat and something stronger, something bitter. Kenzo shut the door behind her. Zivah turned abruptly, her heartbeat quickening. Why did you close the door? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Kenzo smirked. We don't want anyone interrupting our conversation. Deo leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Relax, Zivah. We just want to talk. Malik chuckled darkly. Yeah. We're your teachers, after all. Zivah didn't believe them. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she glanced around the room, searching for an escape. The door was blocked by Kenzo. The window was too high. She was trapped. I need to go, she said, moving toward the door. Kenzo's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was firm, too firm. Not yet, he whispered. Panic exploded inside her. She yanked her arm back, but Kenzo was too strong. His fingers dug into her skin, and the moment she tried to scream, Deo clamped a hand over her mouth. Her muffled cries filled the room as the three men surrounded her like predators circling their prey. Terror surged through Zivah as she fought, but her strength was no match for them. Kenzo leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. You should have come willingly, Zivah. And then, darkness swallowed her whole. The aftermath of evil. When Zivah woke, she felt cold. Her body ached, every limb heavy with exhaustion. Her clothes were torn, and her skin bore bruises that hadn't been there before. She was on the floor, the wooden planks pressing against her cheek. For a moment, she couldn't move. She could barely breathe. Then the memory came crashing down like a thunderstorm. The hands. The laughter. The pain. A sob tore through her throat, but no sound came out. She was empty. The room was silent now. The men were gone, leaving only the scent of their cruelty behind. Slowly, painfully, Zivah pushed herself up, biting down on her lip to keep from screaming. Her legs trembled beneath her as she staggered toward the door, each step sending a fresh wave of agony through her body. She needed to leave. She needed to get out. Stumbling into the night, she wrapped her arms around herself as the village lights flickered in the distance. But as she walked through the silent streets of Komosa, she realized something terrible. She had nowhere to go. The village would never believe her. And even if they did, they wouldn't care. She had heard their whispers before. She stays at Idris's house too often. She must be offering him something. They would say she deserved it. Zivah reached her home and collapsed onto the floor, curling into a ball as silent tears streamed down her face. Her dreams of the city, of becoming a doctor, of making her parents proud, they were gone. Everything was gone. The poison of rumors. The next morning, the rumors began. Kenzo, Deo, and Malik were clever. They knew how to twist the truth. She came willingly, they whispered among the villagers. She's been sleeping with us for weeks. She's not as innocent as she looks. She wanted it. The story spread like wildfire. By the time Zivah stepped out of her home, the entire village was staring at her. The women shook their heads in disgust. The men smirked. The children whispered. She's a disgrace, one woman muttered. Bringing shame to her parents' name. Zivah felt numb. She wanted to scream, to tell the truth, but the moment she opened her mouth, the words choked her. No one would believe her. Not against the word of 3 city men. Not against the whispers of the village. Her stomach twisted as she turned away from their accusing gazes, her heart cracking like glass. She had to leave. She had to get out. The escape. That night, under the cover of darkness, Zivah packed what little she had into a cloth bag. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. She just knew she couldn't stay in Komosa. With quiet, steady steps, she slipped through the village and into the dense forest beyond. For hours, she walked, guided only by the pale light of the moon. She didn't look back. Komosa was no longer her home. And the past. She would bury it forever. Or so she thought. Because some wounds never heal. And some ghosts never sleep. The curse awakens. The village of Komosa slept at night, unaware that it had lost one of its own. Zivah was gone. She had vanished into the darkness, her footsteps swallowed by the vast wilderness beyond the village. For days, no one spoke of her. The rumors had already done their damage, and the villagers had no sympathy for a girl they believed had brought shame upon herself. But Komosa was not silent. The winds grew heavier, whispering through the trees. The rivers ran colder, their currents turning restless. And the night air carried a weight that made even the elders shiver in their sleep. The spirits of Komosa had felt what had been done. And they would not remain silent. Kenzo's fall begins. In the city, Kenzo adjusted his new suit, admiring himself in the mirror. He had landed a prestigious job at a top financial firm, something most young men only dreamed of. Life had been good since leaving Komosa. He barely thought of the village anymore, let alone Zivah. After all, she was just another girl, and he had long since moved on. Until that night. It started with the whispers. At first, he thought it was his imagination, the wind slipping through the cracks in his apartment. But as he lay in bed, he heard it. You took my future. Kenzo's body froze. His breath hitched. He sat up sharply, his heart pounding. The room was empty. But the voice was there. Low. Echoing. Unmistakable. He squeezed his eyes shut. I'm just tired. But then, the walls began to crack. The mirror shattered. And in the broken reflection, Kenzo saw something that made his soul turn to ice. Zivah. She stood there, her eyes hollow, her body drenched in shadows. But her lips curled into a slow, merciless smile. Kenzo barely had time to scream. By morning, his company had fired him without explanation. His bank accounts were frozen. His reputation was in ruins. And the whispers had only just begun. Deo's unraveling. Deo had always been the quiet one. The thinker. The one who calculated before he acted. He thought he had escaped Komosa unscathed. He was wrong. The first sign came as a sickness. A deep, rotten illness that no doctor could explain. It started small, a cough here, a fever there. Then the weight dropped from his body, his bones turning fragile, his skin paling to a sickly gray. Within a month, he couldn't walk. Within 2, he couldn't eat. And through the haze of his agony, he heard it. The voice. You stole my body. Deo's breath itched in terror. He tried to call for help, but his voice failed him. He tried to pray, but the gods did not listen. By the 3rd month, his body had wasted to nothing but bones and skin. And yet, he could not die. Not until he paid the price. Malik's ultimate loss. Malik had always lived without care. He took what he wanted. Did what he pleased. And in return, life had given him everything. Until it took it all away. One evening, as he sat in his new home, a luxury apartment overlooking the city, his phone rang. It was his mother. She was crying. Malik, she whispered. Your father, your brothers, they're gone. His breath caught. What do you mean? They were in an accident, she sobbed. A terrible, terrible accident. Malik's hands shook. His family, his entire bloodline, had been wiped out in a single night. And as he sat there, numb with grief, the lights in his apartment flickered. Then went out completely. And in the darkness, he saw it. Zivah's eyes. Cold. Empty. Unforgiving. You took everything from me, her voice whispered in his ears. And now, I take everything from you. Malik screamed. But there was no one left to hear him. The seer's warning. Desperate and afraid, the 3 men sought out a legendary seer, Elder Baraka, a man known for his wisdom and connection to the spirit world. They traveled deep into the forest outside the city, arriving at his hut in the dead of night. The moment Baraka saw them, his expression turned grim. You are marked, he said. Kenzo dropped to his knees. Please, Great One. Help us. Something is. The spirits are punishing you, Baraka interrupted. The girl you wronged, her ancestors have risen against you. The men stared in horror. The dead do not forget, Baraka continued. The only way to break the curse is to find her. Deo coughed violently. But she vanished. Baraka's voice was like thunder. Then you must seek her. The men trembled. If she does not forgive you, the seer's voice dropped to a whisper. You will never know peace. The words settled like a death sentence. The men exchanged fearful glances. They had no choice. They had to return to Komosa. They had to find Zivah. And they had to beg for her mercy. But what they didn't know was this. Zivah was no longer the girl they had broken. She had changed. And forgiveness does not come without a price. The search for redemption. The road back to Komosa felt longer than the first time they had traveled it. Kenzo, Deo, and Malik rode in silence, their faces gaunt, their bodies worn from sleepless nights of torment. Each of them carried the weight of the curse. Kenzo had lost his career, Deo was barely clinging to life, and Malik had lost his family in one brutal stroke. The whispers had followed them everywhere. You stole my future. You stole my body. You stole my peace. They had tried prayers, rituals, and cleansings, but nothing worked. The spirits were relentless. And now, they had only one hope left, Zivah. If she was still alive. Returning to Komosa. When they arrived in Komosa, it was as if time had stood still. The same dusty roads, the same village huts, the same children playing under the baobab tree. But something had changed. The air was heavy. And when the villagers saw them, their smiles faded. The three men walked carefully, feeling the weight of their past sins pressing down on them. They stopped an old woman near the village square. "Excuse us, Mama," Kenzo said, his voice hoarse. "We are looking for Zivah." The old woman froze. For a long moment, she simply stared at them, her eyes filled with something between pity and disgust. "She's not here," she finally said. Kenzo's stomach dropped. "Where is she?" "She left," the woman said. "After everything that happened." Deo swallowed thickly. "Where did she go?" "No one knows." Kenzo's hands shook. They had come all this way, only to find she was gone. "We must find her," Malik pleaded. "Please, Mama. We need to." A second voice cut through the air like a blade. "Why?" The three men turned sharply. Standing not far from them was a man they recognized instantly. Corporal Idris. The confrontation with Idris. Idris had changed. The man they once knew as a calm, easygoing teacher now stood before them with fire in his eyes. His arms were crossed, his stance rigid, his hatred unmistakable. "You come back after all this time?" Idris hissed. "Looking for the girl you destroyed?" The men were silent. Idris stepped closer, his voice laced with venom. "What do you want, Kenzo?" "To hurt her again. To ruin her even more." Kenzo shook his head violently. No. We need to apologize. We need her to." He couldn't finish the sentence. Because what kind of man begs for mercy from the girl he once shattered? Idris's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he simply stared at them, his rage barely contained. Then, at last, he sighed heavily. "She's in the city." The men's heads snapped up. You know where she is?" Malik whispered. Idris nodded. "I helped her leave Kumosa," he admitted. "After what you did to her, there was nothing left for her here." Kenzo felt sick. "We need to see her," Deo croaked. Idris's eyes darkened. "You don't deserve to." Kenzo clenched his fist. "Please." For a long time, Idris said nothing. Then he turned away, his shoulders stiff with tension. "She lives outside the city now," he muttered. "But she's not the girl you remember." The men swallowed hard. "She's changed," Idris continued, his voice dropping lower. "And I don't know if she will forgive you." A chill ran through them. But they had no choice. They had to try. Or they would never escape the curse. Finding Zivah. The journey to the city felt like a lifetime. Kenzo, Deo, and Malik followed Idris's lead, their bodies weak, their spirits broken. By the time they reached their destination, a quiet village on the outskirts of the city, the sun had begun to set in the distance. Idris stopped in front of a modest little home. "She lives here," he said. The men stared at the house. Their hearts pounded. This was it. This was their only chance. Kenzo took a deep breath and stepped forward. His hands shook violently as he knocked. A long silence followed. Then, at last, the door opened. And there she was. Zivah's return. The girl they had once known was gone. Standing before them was a woman, one whose eyes no longer carried the innocence of youth. Her body was fuller, her face sharper, her expression cold and unreadable. And she was pregnant. Kenzo felt the air leave his lungs. Deo swayed, as if he might collapse. Malik grabbed the doorframe for support. Zivah's eyes slowly drifted over them, emotionless, detached, unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. "You," she murmured. Her voice was calm. Too calm. The calm before a storm. Kenzo fell to his knees. "Zivah," he whispered, his voice raw. We have come to beg for your forgiveness." A silence followed. Zivah's gaze never wavered. She looked at them as if they were nothing. Then, after a long moment, she whispered, "Why should I?" The price of forgiveness. The three men sobbed before her, each of them pleading for mercy. Zivah listened. She let them suffer. She let them break. And then, at last, she spoke. "I will forgive you." Their heads shot up. But her voice turned sharp as a blade. "There is a price." Kenzo's breath caught. Deo's lips trembled. Malik whimpered. Zivah's eyes glowed with something ancient. "None of you will ever have children," she whispered. The men stiffened. "You took away my innocence. My future. My peace." She stepped closer, her presence powerful, almost inhuman. "And so, I take the one thing you desire most." Her gaze burned into them. "You will never know what it means to be a father." The curse solidified in the air, like a chain snapping into place. And the moment she spoke those words, it was done. The final judgment. Kenzo, Deo, and Malik left that night, their souls forever branded. They lived. But they would never have children. Never build families. Never leave a legacy. And they would never escape the memory of the girl they had wronged. Meanwhile, Zivah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. With Idris by her side, she returned to school, built her career, and fulfilled her dream of becoming a doctor. She had lost everything. But she had rebuilt herself from the ashes. And as the village elders whispered the tale for generations to come, one lesson remained. The spirits never forget. And justice always finds those who think they can escape it.